This video is going to contain spoilers for both games. If you wish to go in blind, I'll just say that yes, you should check these games out as I highly recommend them, and this is your chance to leave. You gone? Okay, cool. Let's move on with the video. Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Manga Rider and would you look at this? A video game review. It's been a good while since I've done one of these, huh? What can I really say about platformers? We all love them. Something about walking in the 2D or 3D plane, jumping over bottomless pits, and avoiding enemies is a formula that, while basic, can open up a vast world of possibilities. And many famous IPs have left their mark in how they managed to spice up this basic formula, whether it be by going a little bit faster than their competitors, or just being ball-bustingly hard. But because of the vast amount of different platformers out there, some IPs would slip through the cracks and not receive the same amount of mainstream love as their competitors. And one of these IPs that suffered this fate and developed more of a cult following over the years was a game series called Klonoa. Every time I've heard this series being mentioned, every person who talked about it had nothing to say but praise, claiming that the games are a hidden gem from the PS1 era and were always disappointed that the games never really sold well. These games were so poorly marketed over here and are so rare that if you wanted to buy the OG games yourself, you'd have to spend over $200 just to get your hands on them. Suffice to say, my interest was not so high that I wanted to burn a hole in my wallet just to see what all the fuss was about. So when the release of Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series was announced, and was a much fairer price considering that you got 2 games in one, 2 of my friends who were into this series lost their fucking minds, with some of their friends going out and buying multiple copies in hopes that Namco would make another game, as they said they would do so if this series sold well. Man, this is why I fucking love capitalism. And because I've heard nothing but good things about this series, and combined with the fact that platformers are my favorite type of video games, I thought that I'd jump at the chance to get this pack and give it a shot myself. And after putting over 20 hours into this pack, I have more than enough thoughts to put into a video review and share my praises of these games while also sharing my criticisms. So, without wasting any more time, sit back and relax as I go over my thoughts of the Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series, starting with the first game, Klonoa, Door to Phantomile, and its general plot. Game 1 takes us into the world of Phantomile, where we see Klonoa finding a ring with a Chaos Emerald at the end. There's going to be a lot of Sonic jokes in this video, so just be warned. And when he pulls it out of the ground, a creature then pops out, who we will later know to be a character named Hupo. The 2 friends laugh and frolic across the land until disaster strikes, when a mysterious ship crashes into a bell, which causes Klonoa to wake up from a deep sleep, revealing the fact that it was all a dream. However, as he looks out the window, an airship just so happened to crash into a nearby mountain, and Klonoa, wanting to see what's going on, heads out with Hupo to investigate. After coming across a character who I can only refer to as Simp, they overhear a conversation between a character named Joko and the main villain of the story, Gadius, who is looking for an item called a moon pendant so that he can prevent this character called Diva Lemphis from saving the world with her quote, Song of Rebirth. After the boys get caught and a quick boss battle ensues, Klonoa finds the moon pendant hidden in the bell and goes back to his grandfather to understand what's happening. When his grandfather tells him a story of the mysterious kingdom called the Moon Kingdom, he orders Klonoa to see the forest granny to get more information on the pendant and holds onto it for safekeeping. Damn, I wonder what's going to happen. Klonoa manages to eventually get to her after a few adventures surrounding saving the forest water supply, saving a corrupt king along with a corrupted mother fish, and blasting a plant boss to Kingdom Come, where he is told about a legend surrounding the return of a dark spirit, the moon pendant, Diva Lemphis, and a dream not of this world, that says that if the moon pendant is placed on the Temple of the Sun's pedestals, the path to the Moon Kingdom will appear, and anyone who has that access can do whatever they want. So for safekeeping, the granny warns Klonoa to guard it safely.
In the business, we call this foreshadowing.
When Klonoa innocently says his grandfather has the pendant, however, shit goes quickly south as we find out that Jocko overheard the whole conversation and races back to Granddad's house to get the moon pendant, where he not only succeeds in getting it, but kills Klonoa's grandfather as he did so. Yeah, his grandfather is in like one cutscene, and then the next cutscene he's fucking dead, so okay, that's cool, I guess. Klonoa, now seeking revenge, heads up to the Temple of the Sun to open the gate to the Moon Kingdom, manages to defeat Goddess, but not before he unleashes a monster named Nahatum to destroy the world. But with the power of friendship and camaraderie by his side, Klonoa manages to defeat this final boss and save the world of Phantomile, only to find out that the place he called home wasn't actually his. What I really enjoyed about this story was that while it comes off initially as fairly simple and to the point, towards the end of the game, the story throws in a curveball in revealing the fact that Klonoa was actually the reason this all happened. Because, simply put, he's not actually from this world. Goddess wanted to destroy Phantomile not just out of spite of being abandoned, but also to rid the world of his own nightmare, which turned out to be Klonoa himself. To everybody in Phantomile, Klonoa is basically just a strange dream. And when Hupo, who was later revealed to be the Prince of the Moon Kingdom, reveals to Klonoa that all of his memories of them together were fake and that the Song of Rebirth was going to banish him, it turns a usually happy-go-lucky ending into a morally grey gut punch that makes you rethink everything you just did. It honestly made replaying the game a lot more fucking sad. Because all this time, Klonoa was brought here so that he could save the world of Phantomile, falsely thinking that he was saving his own home, when that was never the case. It makes you call into question just how much of his life was faked by Hupo, and it makes for a fairly hard-hitting ending that left me conflicted and even a little betrayed. It's this simple twist to a very basic story that I think makes Klonoa stand out a lot more than its other competitors, and I think it's one of the reasons that Klonoa actually kept such a strong cult following for so many years. This is good. Good fucking soup. But of course, a game's story is only a small part to a good video game. What's the gameplay itself like? Well, from my experience, the boys weren't lying. This game is really fucking fun. Door to Phantomile is a 2.5D collectathon and runs like a very classic platformer. You have a total of 6 worlds to beat, each with 2 levels which are called Visions, with Vision 2 consisting of both a level and a boss fight at the end. During the levels you are met with basic platforming, simple puzzles, and collectibles that you can get to both get more lives and unlock more shit at the end of the game. And to get to the end, you'll be met with various different challenges and skills that you need to learn and master. So, what kind of challenges will you face? Aside from the obvious bottomless pits, one of Klonoa's gimmicks is that he does not have the ability to jump on enemies like in other platformers. If your body so much as grazes an enemy in any way, you will take damage, which depending on the difficulty, could be fatal. So, to fight back, Klonoa's gimmick is the use of the Chaos Emerald Ring, which when you press the attack button lets you not only shoot crystals to solve puzzles, but also shoot enemies, inflate them, and use them as a weapon by pressing the attack button again to throw them. I'm sure I'm right in saying that at least one degenerate had their sexual awakening when they saw this mechanic for the first time, but I'm just gonna move on from that. Once you have an enemy in your grasp, the game then opens up another mechanic that you can use to make platforming much more creative. Let's talk about the game's double jump. Door to Phantomile is one of the old platformers to have the double jump mechanic implemented into its gameplay, but rather than giving the player the option to just press the jump button again, which would cause a flutter jump, which I'll get to later, the game has it so that when you grab an enemy, press the jump button, and press the jump button again, Klonoa will throw the enemy towards the ground and give himself an extra boost, which acts as a double jump. This is one of the main gimmicks of these two games. This was a mechanic that not only made using the enemies highly recommended, but it's also used very effectively. Because the enemy is thrown down towards the ground after you double jump, Klonoa implements various obstacles, extra paths, and collectibles that you can only get to if you use this mechanic effectively, with some enemies and even some boss fights forcing you to use this strategy in order to beat them. The game pretty much actively encourages and rewards you for learning this move. This mechanic is very different to other platformers and can be a little difficult to pick up at the start, but once you get used to it, it becomes practically second nature to you. By the end of the game, you would have fully mastered this double jump, and some of the skills you can do with this mechanic are extremely satisfying to pull off. And if by any chance you did not master the jump, well, you're gonna have to. Speaking of using the enemies to get to higher ground, the game also finds multiple ways to get you to use them. Everything from using them to kill bigger foes, being the only way you can hit bosses in boss battles, using them as a shield from damage, and throwing them to get faraway collectibles, enemies are going to be your friend when you play through the game. Without them, you're going nowhere. So master using them as your inflated bitch quickly. This does sound like a pretty hefty challenge, but do not worry. If you manage to fuck up somehow and miss your target, enemies will usually infinitely respawn, so you can keep making mistakes and doing some random shit without much punishment. Though, to be fair, it is funny to hold on to an enemy, walk through a door, and complete a puzzle in a way the game clearly did not intend you to do. This game really does want to hold your hand throughout a lot of it, but I don't need that. Big bringo brr. As for the collectibles in the game, each level has 6 weird map painting thingies that can be found either in plain sight or hidden away in branching paths. These things will either be trapped inside a bubble, which you can just pop with a shot from your Chaos Emerald ring, or in eggs that you can only break with an enemy's non-consenting body. Quick thing, some eggs are hidden and you can only find them if you step on their shadow, so do keep that in mind. After you break the seal, you free a civilian that thematically fits with whatever world you're playing in. What I noticed very quickly about the game was that collecting all the civilians was actually fairly easy, because on top of the fact that most of them are in plain sight and require only a slight bit of adventure in you to find them, once you get a civilian out of their trap, you have them for good. Unless you somehow manage to get a game over. What I mean by this is that if you were to save a civilian and then you die later on, the game will keep the civilian freed, meaning that you can sacrifice a life to get a collectible and the game won't punish you for it. This will come in extremely handy when you start getting to the harder stages and you're rescuing civilians that are over bottomless pits, like in World 6 Vision 2. I swear if I had to beat that level without dying, I wouldn't have bothered beating the game. This simple addition was a fucking godsend, and definitely made collecting all 72 civilians a lot easier, which I give the game a lot of credit for. But what exactly do you get out of it? What's the reward? If you were to complete this small side quest and beat the final boss, the reward for all your hard work is a bonus extra hard stage at the end, which puts the skills you've built up over the course of your playthrough to the test. And it does completely hammer home the fact that one of these characters is an absolute simp. But that's besides the point. This final challenge is why I recommended you to master the double jump earlier, because that is all you're going to be doing in this level. The number of times you're going to hear Klonoa screaming wahoo like a helium prepubescent Super Mario is going to hurt your soul if you haven't mastered the art of the double jump, so save yourself the headache and just get good scrub. There is also another side quest you can do where you can collect all 150 Dreamstones in each level, which is the game's version of coins. And when I did some research into what you actually get, doing this doesn't give you an actual reward, but only changes the gem color in the world map to a different color. Doing this only gives you, I don't know, bragging rights?
That is bullshit!
Look, I would only recommend you do this if you're that anal about 100% in Klonoa, but for the sane people in the crowd, my suggestion is that you just say,
Fuck that!
and just focus your efforts on getting the civilians. Beating the game's main story also unlocks Time Attack, which allows you to play against the bosses and try beat them as fast as you can, and Hard Mode, which gives you the option to play the game on a new save file with 1 heart instead of 3, and a single hit is all it takes to kill you. This is for the hardcore boys in the audience, so have fun with that. I ain't touching this mode anytime soon. Also, if you picked easy mode, you deserve to be mocked. Look guys, don't be a fucking coward, lives are fun. Put on the big boy gloves and play normal mode, it ain't too difficult. If I can do it, so can you. When it comes down to how Klonoa actually controls, I don't really have many complaints. He responds very well to controller inputs, his speed is a little slow but is quick to get used to, his jump is a good height and platforming isn't too hard, though I wish he had a short jump or hop and not just one decided jump, and his Chaos Emerald ring manages to hit everything 99% of the time, with only a few small hiccups here and there. Where I think Klonoa's platforming suffers a bit is the addition of one of the game's other gimmicks. the flutter jump. Yep, we're finally talking about this. If you hold onto the jump button while he's airborne, Klonoa will do this small flutter that keeps him floating in the air for about 2 extra seconds, which can act as either an extra little boost to get to a platform or save your life from a fall. And I'm just gonna come out and say it. This mechanic is absolute garbage. The reason why I find the flutter jump to be so fucking useless is that on top of it not really having much range, so using it is only really useful on the rare occasion, if you had any momentum when you jumped, the flutter jump completely kills it. And if you so much as hold onto the jump button for a second too long, the flutter jump will activate, causing you to lose all your momentum and fall to your death. Yoshi's Island had this fucking mechanic and it was done so much better. When an SNES game is doing better than you, you know you fucked up. I shit you not when I say that I lost way too many lives to this mechanic, and it made some stages like World 6 Vision 2, which is easily the hardest level in the game because it requires the most precise platforming out of the levels, an absolute chore to go through. I game overed a total of 3 times during my first playthrough, and 2 of those times can be blamed solely on the flutter jump getting in my way. This gimmick is bullshit. As for the game's presentation, this remake completely nailed the look of the 90s game. Even on the lowest settings, which I played in because I play on a laptop, I don't own a PC, the game not only looks really good, but it runs really well. I only had maybe 1 or 2 frame rate drops, and that's about it. The backgrounds look beautifully simplistic and vibrant, colors are cartoony and popping, the game really likes to play with the 2.5D aspect with some of the scenery you go through, and the music manages to capture the almost ethereal nature of a dreamlike trance, which was fucking sick. I also found the game keeping the more unpolished animations from the original intact extremely charming, because to me, it just gave off the vibes that I was playing the old game, with just some better visuals. I don't know, there's just something about seeing Klonoa's arms go through his collar, his ears obviously moving separately from his head, and his eyes not even looking at characters at times that just makes me feel nostalgic. Like, it reminds me of the days when platformers were more limited in what they could do. It just feels nice to look at, to be honest. There is this cute little add-on called the pixel filter, which when turned on makes the visuals look like you're playing the old game, but as someone with no nostalgia bias towards the game, I honestly found this filter a little sore on the eyes, and it just made me feel like I was playing a deep-fried meme, so suffice to say, I kept this filter off. The game definitely tries to keep as much of the old games intact in this pack, which I find to be cool and honestly very commendable. I mean, after all, why fix something that wasn't broken? However, I think where this pack went overboard was bringing back the old audio of the game when it came to most of the cutscenes. While the music is exactly the same and sounds absolutely incredible, because it was the PS1 era of audio recording, the voice audio in the cutscenes is super compressed. And it gets really weird when some lines are clearly re-recorded to make some of the emotional scenes better, like in Granddad's death and Klonoa being banished. Not to mention that hearing Klonoa's updated sounds in-game, and then suddenly hearing him sound like this was very weird. I don't know, it was just kinda jarring. It's a bit of a nitpick, I know, but I feel like it's still worth pointing out. But that's pretty much all I've got when it comes to complaints. With its creative platforming gimmicks, nostalgic look, and rather impactful story, despite my grievances surrounding the flutter jump and some of the audio, I fucking loved playing this game. Fun fact, I did originally record my second playthrough and accidentally perma-deleted the footage, which meant I had to play the game again, but despite being annoyed at that, I wasn't at all bothered by the idea of playing the game for a third time and fully mastering the controls. When a game can do something like that, you know it was fucking good. And after beating it 3 times, the Russians are here. And after beating the whole game 3 times, hard level included, I can say that Door to Phantomile, while being a short and rather easy game, and by short I really fucking mean it, my first playthrough was under 4 hours and my third was under 2, Klonoa still provided me with this warm nostalgic feeling that old classic video games give off. It is a really small hidden gem of a game that I would recommend anyone who's a fan of platformers to pick up. Trust me, you won't regret it. And with all that said and done, let's move on to the second game of the pack, Klonoa 2 Lunatea's Veil, starting again with its plot. Game 2 opens up with a silhouette calling out for help, and then we see Klonoa falling from the sky into the sea where he died a horrible death. The end. But before he could die and get robbed of his ring by 2 characters named Liarina and Tat, Klonoa is saved by 2 people, named Lolo and Popka, who tell him he is now in the world of Lunatea, a world consisting of 4 kingdoms, tranquility, joy, and indecision that keep to themselves and never venture away from their lands. This is also where we see Klonoa in his full new glory, and because he looks so much like a Sonic OC, I'm simply going to call him Ears. I'm sorry, I'm just not a fan of this design. After reaching an island and ringing a giant bell using his Chaos Emerald ring, and after talking with a character named Bakuji who explains the evil power of a mysterious 5th bell worming its way into Lunatea, the boys then head to the High Priestess, where Lolo, a priestess in training, gets her grand title. The boys are then sent out on a mission to ring the bells of the 4 kingdoms and gather their elements before Liarina can, for she wants to allegedly save the world like the boys. Well, you had me until the laugh. After getting the elements of tranquility, joy, losing the element of to Liarina, and getting the last element indecision, the boys go back to who they think is Bakuji, but is actually Liarina in disguise, who steals the elements from under their very noses and heads off to the last hidden tower of Lunatea, which she rings, causing the end of the world. But as Ears gets there, disaster strikes, as Liarina, getting corrupted with the power, turns into a giant monster, which he manages to defeat. Now with Liarina joining their side, Ears and his army of friends cross the threshold and into the Lost Kingdom of Sorrow, where they meet the final boss, the King of Sorrow. And in typical Klonoa fashion, the story is actually a lot sadder than you initially thought. As it turns out, the King of Sorrow was actually the one who brought Ears to Lunatea, and was in fact the one who was asking for help all this time. Because in a sad twist of events, the King of Sorrow actually used to be a part of the 4 kingdoms, but because of the world's disdain towards Sorrow, a veil was put over the kingdoms, and he was left to be forgotten. And now, consumed wholeheartedly with revenge, Sorrow now wants to have Ears be his vessel to let out all of his pain and destroy the world, but is of course defeated. In his last moments, Ears takes sympathy on Sorrow and actually rings his bell, making sure that everyone who forgot about Sorrow would remember him. When he finally passes away in Klonoa's arms, Sorrow turns into the last element of the game. After a small bit of time, Ears eventually leaves Lunatea, but not before saying goodbye to Lolo, who he promises that they will always be together. Like the first game, the story of Ears 2 was certainly one of the highlights. Like its predecessor, Ears 2 works in various character arcs, nice little scenes that help further develop bonds between the cast, and of course has the twist ending that makes you reconsider everything you did up until that point. The side characters, who I thought weren't going to get much development, got some really nice backstories here. Lolo goes through a whole arc where she wants to prove to her peers that she has what it takes to be a priestess, but because she worked with Ears to ring the bell and has been bullied all her life, she feels like she cheated, and begins to wallow in self-doubt, which only stops because Ears was in danger. And at the end of the game, she actually gives up her title, just so that she can one day earn the title with her own strength. It is a small little arc, but it was nice to see. And the way that the story drew parallels of Lolo and the antihero Liarina, with her going down a destructive path to prove her worth instead of working with friends, was really impressive. But the King of Sorrow twist was easily my favorite part of this story. What was built up to be this stone-cold monster that was going to destroy the world for his own selfish gain turned out to be just a person who was banished and forgotten because he was an emotion that everyone hated and wanted to purge from their lives. The way he described how people react to sorrow as an emotion was a really good example of the game's excellent writing. His anger towards the world turning its back on him was a lot more understanding, and his cries for help over the course of the game was used to great effect when you eventually find out who the voice belonged to. Having Ears ring his bell after defeating him and reassuring Sorrow that the world will not forget him in his dying moments was a really great scene. I swear, it's this deepness to the Klonoa games that make them truly special. Also, the way the game managed to tie in Sorrow with the goodbye scene at the end, while it's simple, was still really good. It just ties the whole narrative in a handsome little bow. In terms of story, I certainly think that this one was handled a lot better than the first game. And in terms of the visuals, that received a massive upgrade as well. I mean, that does make sense. This game was on the PS2 originally. The worlds just feel so much more alive, with the backgrounds having tons of detail and animations playing to give the stages more life. The level design is much more diverse in terms of settings, with the game taking full advantage of the idea of there being 5 kingdoms. And the character designs are a lot more complex and interesting to look at, while at the same time keeping to the simplistic style that made the first game so striking. In terms of writing and overall aesthetic, Ears 2 is a worthy sequel and manages to breathe in familiar but new life into the series. But then the gameplay comes in. I'm very conflicted on my thoughts towards how this game plays. On its own, it's fine. It's exactly like the old game, in which it's a 2.5D collectathon where you get various stuff as you travel through the levels, which are now a lot bigger, with the damage this time being 1 whole heart on normal mode as opposed to the half heart in the last game, making this one a little more difficult. For the collectibles, you have the same Dreamstones, which if you collect 100 you get a life, coins that give you extra lives, which is also in the first game but I forgot to bring them up, so sorry, and 6 stars hiding in the levels instead of civilians. And like the game that came before it, if you die after collecting one, you still hold on to it unless you game over. And instead of just platforming, the game does occasionally spice up the gameplay by having more complicated puzzles, anti-gravity mechanics, and some stages being full-on snowboarding levels, which have really good controls and are very fun to play. And in terms of controller response, the game succeeds all the time, and it still runs completely fine, but there definitely was an increase in frame rate drops. All in all, the game is fine, don't get me wrong, but in terms of being a sequel to the first game, Ears 2 just pales in comparison to what the first game managed to accomplish. This one has a lot of problems that the first game either never had or I thought would have been fixed. For one, Ears is slower. While in the first game, Klonoa's slow speed was quick to get used to, as the levels themselves were designed around this slower playstyle, in Lunatea's Veil, Ears is noticeably a lot slower than what he should be. I initially thought I was just hallucinating this point, but when I took the footage and played them alongside each other, the evidence is right there. Ears' speed has gone down drastically. This would have been fine if the levels were built around this new speed, but the problem is that they aren't. These stages are way too fucking big to have Ears traverse them at the speed he's going, and because of the level's larger sizes and the fact that he is so fucking slow, it makes the game feel artificially longer. This artificial gameplay gets even worse with just how much the game loves to bounce Ears around all willy-nilly, with the new additions of cannons which shoot you to another part of the level, small tornadoes that give you an extra boost, and red balls that drag you across large gaps. I swear that at least 1/10 of this game is played for you with the number of times this happens. Some of this stuff was way too automated. All of these new additions combined, while making the game feel stylistically different from its predecessor, forgot what made the first game so fun in the first place. That being the fact that the first game didn't need so many gimmicks. It's just way too much padding. Anyways, I went on a bit of a tangent there, sorry about that. Let's go back to the speed point. In some levels, the game will have these chase sections, where you either have to catch someone or an enemy is trying to kill you. Because of Ears' slower running speed, these sections have nowhere near the amount of danger they should have had, and makes them feel cheap because I just know that that should not have even been possible. Oh no, I'm being chased by a giant robot that will definitely kill me if it even so much as touches me. Ears, will you hurry the fuck up? What are you Why are you going at that speed? I'm supposed to be chasing you. This slow speed is thankfully not a problem at all when it comes to the snowboarding sections, which are by far the best parts of the game, but when you're platforming, the slower run is glaringly obvious. However, what makes this running speed and the platforming even worse is Ears' jump and his flutter jump. Why are these mechanics somehow worse? Rather than having the really good jump from the first game, Ears' jump has been fucking sliced in half in this one, which makes platforming without the use of an enemy far more difficult than it has any right to be. Because the game barely compensates for the shorter jump, in platforming sections you only manage to jump to the next ledge by the skin of your fucking teeth. And the flutter jump, oh boy, the fucking flutter jump, has all the same problems as the first game, but is even worse. Because now that this boy is slower, fuck off, I'm doing a demonstration. When you hold the jump button to activate the flutter jump, any small amount of momentum you could have had from your jump is fucking gone. What the fuck, I barely survived that. This gimmick went from being a rare hassle to an absolute hindrance. What the fuck happened? And is it just me? Or was the Chaos Emerald ring neutered as well? Because I swear I missed grabbing an enemy far more in this game than I did the last one. I ended up losing so many fucking lives because using the Chaos Emerald ring was like playing Russian roulette on whether I was going to grab something or not, making some levels like World 5 Vision 1 an absolute fucking pain. Maybe it was because I didn't get used to the new controls, which in that case is fucking bullshit. A good sequel would make sure it kept its old game's controls in mind. Not to mention the fact that it's a 3-hour game and I would have mastered the controls by hour 1. Or it was just the game being far more unforgiving than the last one. But either way, the gameplay took a massive hit in terms of playability. To illustrate my point perfectly, if I was to take Klonoa from the first game and put him in this one, I'd be able to play the game and complete it with no problems. However, if I took Ears and put him in the first game, I would not be able to beat it. The double jump was also neutered. What the fuck? How did you neuter the double jump? That's not... Huh? With this massive punch to the gameplay's overall enjoyability, Ears 2, while still being a fun and decent game, is just not as good as Klonoa 1 in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, I didn't hate my experience with it. Despite all my criticisms, I still got quite a bit of enjoyment out of this game, but I just wasn't able to get into it as much as I did with the first one. Case in point, when I recorded footage for Door to Phantomile, I played the whole game in one sitting with no breaks. I enjoyed it that much. When I recorded footage for this game though, I took a break every 3 levels. I don't know, the game's overall spark just wasn't there when it came down to me actually playing the game. All in all, Klonoa 2 is... meh. But for my final thoughts, all in all, for a gift of 2 games for a fairly decent price, I do recommend that you get this pack. Both games have their strengths and weaknesses, and binging the both of them was overall a very fun experience. And who knows, maybe you might get some enjoyment out of Klonoa 2, I wouldn't know. With their great stories, vastly different gameplay style to other platformers, and lovely cartoony visuals, I'm glad I decided to get the pack. And if you are a fan of platformers yourself, this is a must-have. I can now see why Klonoa was always seen as being a hidden gem. And if the pack ends up selling well, I look forward to the next installment, whenever that may be. These games were 100% worth my time. But for now, my name is Manga Rider, and I hope to see you in the next one.